How are you guys?
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, okay.
I've had a very crazy week. So if you can't tell from my background, I'm actually sitting in a McDonald's right now. So.
Actually can't see your background at the moment. So, oh, now we can. Okay.
Oh well. Well, I was going to say if you couldn't see it, that's good. I actually just realized. Hold on one second. I should probably see if I can.
You're breaking up. Actually, it's hard to hear you.
Can you get me now?
Yes, you just break up here and there.
Yes, that's
Are
better.
you
Sorry.
in Binghamton?
No, I'm 30 minutes out from my base. It's a duty weekend, and with the road construction on 88, I just wasn't going to make it to the base on time to get to my room. So it was either McDonald's or be late. So I went with the Golden Arches.
So I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to have to leave on time, which was 6:30, right? We go till just because of another thing that I have scheduled, and I try to squeeze as much time for this event as possible. But
No, absolutely. I appreciate that. I don't think we'll go that. I mean, obviously.
Okay. Well,
need
who
the
knows? I just
time,
wanted
of
to let
course.
you know. Okay.
No, I
So-
appreciate it. That's very kind of you.
I know.
Lee, it's 5:02. Are we ready to go?
Yes, we're all set.
Are we broadcasting?
We are now.
Excellent. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Municipal and Public Affairs Committee for the City of Binghamton City Council, May 13th, 2022, Friday at 5:02 p.m. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Councilwoman Rosnetti. Councilwoman Riley is absent at the moment. And Chairman Scaringi.
Present.
Okay, those are the three members of the MPA committee. Riley is absent. And then also we have Councilwoman Friedman, and it looks like Councilman Burns just signed out as well.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. So we have a quorum. Thank you, Councilwoman Friedman as well, and Councilman Burns for coming today. And let's jump right in. So this is our first MPA meeting associated with our City Council broader code discussions and code categories that we came up with. Per our email discussions on April 10th earlier this year, this is meeting one. And the two broad categories that we're going to be starting off with today are quality of life issues, as well as code processes and procedures. So again, just as a quick review, quality of life issues, we broadly categorized as things that can relate to anything from high grass, garbage, noise, dogs, jaywalking, bicycles on the sidewalk, basketball hoops in the road, noise ordinances, things like that. Not that there can't be others, but that's just a broad start. Code processes and procedures. Some things we're looking at here are things related to times, city resources, allocations of money. And these can again be related to code resources in general, the time related to deal with code issues, code enforcement more broadly, and reimagining code processes. So with that being said, I'm going to try to keep some informal notes here as well as we kind of move between these two. So I think just for efficiency purposes, we'll just go in ordinal order, if you will, or move in an ordinal fashion rather, and just start with quality of life issues. obviously I will, not just to our MPA members, Councilwoman Rosinetti and myself, but obviously I'll open the floor to Councilwoman Friedman or Councilman Burns if they have anything that they would like to add. So I'll open it up to the floor if there's any discussion that anyone would like to add on a substantive level. Is there anything that anyone wanted to start out with?
Oh, I was just, I'm so sorry that, I was trying to connect to the Wi-Fi. So I heard the first topic you said was quality of life issues, including things like, dogs, all who street. What was the second thing that you mentioned?
Again, this was per our email discussion on April 10th. And the second one was code processes and procedures. So this was times, resources, and money. And this dealt with some sub areas such as code resources, time related to code issues, city resources and their prioritization, code enforcement more broadly, and reimagining code processes. So again, of course, so just moving in an ordinal fashion, we can start with quality of life issues and wanted to offer the opportunity for anyone to provide any updates, any feedback, anything that they would like to see as we move forward in this category.
And Councilman Swearinger, we're talking about the quality of life issues, just again to just to be clear, we're talking about the grass, garbage, noise, dogs, jaywalking, bicycles on the sidewalk, basketball hoops on the road. And this is for the email that came in. I don't know when it was a little.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, just so you break in now, sometimes your voice, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. Okay, thank you.
No, I apologize. Thank you. Of course. So I emailed every. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Councilwoman Rosinetti.
Go
I
ahead.
apologize. No, I was just going to say, I know I had sent everyone out a pretty detailed list of things that we kind of aggregated together. So, you know, obviously these are our opportunity to be able to have any discussions. So just to open the floor to anything that anyone would like to add.
Yeah, I'm just thinking here regarding the high grass and some of the changes that we were talking about. I've heard really nothing as far as anybody being against this in the community. I don't know if anyone else has. Just, you know, as far as the feedback goes, I think for the most part, I've heard some positive things. So I just thought I'd throw that out there for whatever that's worth. I don't know if anybody else has heard anything.
I can definitely echo those sentiments. Oh, go ahead, Councilman Burns. My apologies.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that I don't know anybody, people that I tell that we've changed the grass and that we're working on the grass, that we've hired more people, that the mayor hired more people, that we've approved it to hire more people to cut the grass, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody's all for it, and they're even all for. I just left a group of people saying that I got to go to a city council meeting. I'm going to end up at the council chambers, I think. But as I said, I was going to go. What is it on a Friday night? I said yes, and we're talking about code, and they were like, "Oh, that's great! You're working on code." So you know, people are delighted that we're going to do it. So I'm hoping that we do come up with some change. And I you know, I've had discussions with people. I don't know. We these quality of life issues that you're talking about. I think that we all agree that they are a problem, you know, like the number of dogs in the front yard or even in the backyard. But, you know, you walk down the street and all of a sudden, rah, and you're getting on Clinton Street. That's your district. Just kidding. But on Clinton Street, there was one that really startled me personally. And it was like 3 or 4 dogs in the front yard, big dogs. It was, I think it was near the, over near the senior center. But at any rate, you know, there are problems like that. And so, yes. So how do we deal with it? Why can't it go faster? And what are we going to do?
I would agree. To just echo those broader sentiments, obviously we've had some RLs and some policy updates come down as it relates to grass. an overwhelming majority, I cannot say 100%, but an overwhelming majority of the feedback that I have received on it has been positive. As it relates to, okay, so we changed it, we decreased it from 10 to 8 inches, which I think was a really good start. And now moving forward, ensuring that the Parks Department has the tools and resources that are necessary to ensure that very specific team that is going to be focused on that, regardless of the property's geographic location throughout the city, ensuring that there's a system in place, that there's enough manpower as well as tools and resources to be able to do it. I think at the end of the day, the issue that we end up with as it relates to at least high grass is that at properties where it exceeds the 10-inch height and then just grows and grows and grows, it just becomes, again, a quality of life issue and a negative impact on the neighborhood. So, I'm sure we've all seen this at different points. I can say on my 6.5 years on council, I've dealt with things from high grass all the way to tires on front properties, and particularly when we get into the summer and the humidity and the temperature increases, it increases the opportunity for mosquitoes and other issues in relation to that can impact obviously neighboring properties. But I know obviously this is going to be a big undertaking for the Parks Department, and I think we, in conjunction with working with the mayor, we need to make sure that obviously as we get to budget hearings come around the late September, October timeframe, that we're ensuring that what the Parks Department is telling us that they need, that we're supporting that effort to get that in there. Councilwoman, yep, Councilwoman Freeman, I'm sorry. Please.
No problem. I don't know how formal or informal this needs to be, but I think one thing in mind that is an important issues that are caused by tenants and issues that are caused by landlords, because I think particularly, in speaking with people in my district, there's two, or one way to divide the quality of life issues is by, I hear a lot of tenants complaining about neglectful landlords, right? That it's like something that a tenant and also landlords complaining that, well, I got cited something that my tenant did. So like talking to somebody who is a landlord and is upset because I'm trying to remember what it was. I think tenants they had a buildup of garbage, and the landlord was like, well, it's not to get the tenants garbage. Then there's also tenants who are like, well, there's mold in my apartment, or, well, that's not really like what we're talking about right now, but issues that they can't really help. So I guess I think maybe that might be a helpful distinction to make, because we might have to approach those two types of issues in a different way. I don't know that a solution that would help a tenant, or would help prevent problems from a neglectful tenant also, I mean, maybe it would sometimes, but I think it might be, I don't know, that I'm just throwing that out there as potentially like a helpful distinction for us to like tackle the problem from two different viewpoints, maybe.
No, I appreciate that, and again, just for noting, very nice to see our corp one of our corp councils here, Sharon's working with us. So hey, Sharon, how are you? Councilwoman, I will tell you that when the question that you just raised, and Sharon actually, she might even remember this because these were early discussions that she and I, as well as a number of others in the Corp Council's office, I was having probably 5 or 6 years ago. I remember when I first joined this body in January of 2016, as it relates to code issues, just more broadly. One of the issues that I ran into right away was, from a legal standpoint, do we have the ability to be able to create a distinction of code violations on a property owner versus one who resides at a property but is not the owner of that property? And at the time, as well as with ongoing discussions that have occurred over the years, my broad understanding is that from a legal perspective, I do not know if we have the ability to differentiate those two things, because again, Sharon's the expert here as it relates to legal things and not me. But my sense of the situation is that if code violation X is violated by person Y, a citation needs to be able to be associated with a property. And I'm fairly certain that comes down to ownership. I'd love to know if Sharon has any insight as it relates to any updates, if there has been over the years. I know the legal landscape obviously can change from time to time, but Sharon, please feel free to, and again, thank you for joining us. Please feel free to jump in if you feel you might have anything substantive to add on that, because it's a good question. And Sharon, as you know, as well as I do, this is something that you and I have talked about for a number of years now.
Yeah, so it's an important distinction to make. So for most provisions in the code, and primarily we're talking about chapter 265 as it relates to kind of code enforcement issues and habitability, it has to be assigned to, a citation needs to be done to a person responsible for the property, which is generally a property manager. But it's primarily the owner, the person with interest in property, because the citation itself has to be noticed to the parcel owner of record based off of the address that they've assigned. So it's generally the owner, a property manager, if the property management company has taken over being responsible, and that means they have to update code enforcement and the city treasurer with their address of record. Or, for example, it can be a person responsible for the condition. So in the past, when we've had an illegal dumping charge or trash and garbage, if you can associate the trash and garbage responsibility, or a junk vehicle is another good example. Junk meaning inoperable or registration that is out of date. Those are the types of violations where, with a bit of evidentiary submission, you can find that the person responsible is actually the occupant of the property. But it's pretty much limited to junk vehicles. And when it comes to the trash and garbage citations, what we would do is we would typically cite the owner. The owner would say, I'm complying in all the ways that I can. This is my tenant's responsibility, is the buildup. It's on their back porch. It's on their portion of the property. I can't remedy it because I'll be liable for destroying their valuable property. And that's true, actually, just because one man's trash is another man's treasure. And the other thing we are able to cite, are people who are responsible under land contracts. So in the past, we've cited a person responsible under a land contract for a property, if that helps.
No, I appreciate that, Sharon. And I think with respect to, again, under chapter 265, those examples, Sharon, that you brought up as it relates to, say, for example, person Y is residing and renting at property X and they have car Z. The car is up on blocks and the registration has gone 6 months past, right? The renter residing at the property doesn't own the property, but they own the car, right? So I think and again, Sharon, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be, but again, my general kind of sense is ownership, regardless of the code allegation or charge, seems to be a key element of whether something can actually be prosecuted or not.
Yes, and I think that's exactly the way to describe it, because an owner can't, and the junk vehicle is a good example, an owner can't authorize the towing of that vehicle from their property, and actually no tow company will do that really on the owner's. So the owner is unable to remedy, the property owner is unable to remedy the condition, right? So it's the person who is able to remedy the condition, which is typically the property owner. But the code actually has a provision of persons responsible, and it defines persons responsible as owners, persons with an interest in the property, which is why the land contract situation can come into play.
Sharon, if I can ask that, so that notation in the law, as the way it's written, is that local city of Binghamton ordinance, or is that state law?
That's a good question. So it's codified in our code as local, but it likely mirrors, if I'm not mistaken, the last time I looked at this on one of my land contract cases, mirrors the New York State code that's on point.
That's what I thought. So, and the reason why I asked that is because that if it mirrors the state law, that is more than likely on our end something that is not amended, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And some of the situations I'm talking about where code is then authorized, or the court is authorized to direct some other person responsible, like a property manager or a tenant, is generally done once court proceedings have been filed, because city court has plenary jurisdiction to essentially remedy, I should say, give orders that result in a remedy of the charged file, essentially to follow the property issue through to completion. So because it has this kind of broader authority, it can order the city to cite the tenant as one of its remedies, or cite the owner of the vehicle, because we always cite the owner of the property in the original instance, really until we get to court where the court allows us to cite the owner of the vehicle.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Sharon. Councilwoman Friedman, I don't know if that helps at all or provides any insight.
Yeah, it both helps and makes it more complicated.
I agree. I would absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. I mean, I think it makes it much clearer for many of us, that basically ownership seems to be, like you said, the key element to this, right? And so I'm thinking about, the example you gave with the car, so the owner is responsible, or if there are issues with the structure, with the building itself, like code issues, it makes sense. You kind of know where to go with that. What I'm hearing, about cars and about code issues with the actual buildings, but primarily, to be honest, it's garbage. And it goes back to, now we're talking about ownership again, it seems to be the key element, but there's something a little different to the garbage piece as opposed to the car that's just sitting there without a license plate, or the porch is falling apart, right? I think. And so, because who's responsible? Like, how are we going to remedy this? And I have no answers because I see the complexities, right, on both sides. But I'm hearing from both tenants with issues and concerns, but I'm also hearing about from neighbors about garbage, and they're piling up. And again, the owner can't really do anything about it, right? Because, like you said, Sharon, you can't really mess with somebody's garbage, right? And so what do we do about that? I mean, and all of these things that we talked about are really important. The one that just really stands out for me, and what seems to, when we're talking about beautification, when we're talking about sanitation, when we're talking about, those sort of things, as we're driving around and spring has sprung here in Binghamton, we're seeing all this garbage and people having tons of it on their back porches and accumulations of this, bags and bags. So, I don't really have a question. I'm just kind of talking about, it appears to me that it's easier to address an issue like with a car, like I said, or a building falling apart. And I just hope that we come together if possible and figure out how to really address the issue of garbage. I get calls all the time. It's like the number, would you agree? Yeah, it's the number one thing. So in this long list of important issues, I hope that we can figure something out about that.
Yeah, I will echo. I'm sorry, Sharon. I will just echo that. I think Councilwoman Rosinetti is kind of hitting the nail on the head. As it relates to this quality of life issue stuff.
Right.
The biggest stuff that I hear is garbage, and loose garbage, dogs, loud music. It's really kind of just those day-to-day type of things. And I'm sure Sharon will remember this. I'm not going to say the address out loud, but this was back in early 2018, working with Court Counsel and DPW to try to get a renter cited for garbage that was left. There was so much of it. The DPW, again, along the ownership line, they actually had to open the garbage bags to try to find, say, for example, mail that was sent to them that was thrown out, or a credit card receipt with a name on it, so they could tie the garbage with the person who it was believed was not properly disposing of the garbage. And they weren't able to do that. They did eventually clean it up, so we thank the DPW for that, obviously, because they do that a lot. But
Yeah, so
you know, Sharon, it
that's-
makes me wonder. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. And I think one of the things you can kind of tell residents for now, or your citizens for now, is there is a process for it. It's just long. So the incident or the incidences that Councilman Scaringi is mentioning is they did, in fact, we were in fact able to cite somebody. They were in fact able to deduce who it was based off of the mail. This is on an illegal dumping charge, and he was cited and he was fined. He pled in court, but they engaged in the same behavior, I think, a month or so later, and then the process starts all over again. So you have your citation. Illegal dumping is a little bit more different because they you don't have to wait a 30-day period to enact compliance. But a lot of what you're talking about, which is that what appears to be trash on people's porches, whether or not they're front or back porches or in people's backyards, landlords are reluctant to remedy that because it's the tenant's possessions. And so often it looks like stuff that maybe garbage, maybe it's not garbage. So garbage means something very specific under our code. And the process is we take the landlord to court. The court then orders, the landlord says the tenant's responsible for this. If it's a multifamily, it's a little bit more complicated because which tenant is responsible for it. We then try and find out which tenant is responsible for it. And then the court can order remediation or citation to the tenant. So often we have the landlord and tenant in court at the same time. And let me just tell you, when it comes to a remediation order from the court, I have to identify, and we've done this before, identify which things are garbage and which things are not garbage. And when you have hoarders, that's particularly difficult. But we have done it, but I will tell you those cases have taken anywhere from citation to actual remediation. That's a DPW work order onto the property, because they can work order the stuff on the street, but they can't work order on a particular like backyard or on a porch. A year and a half. So about 6 months to a year and a half.
Sharon, to kind of tie in our other category of code processes and procedures, is there something that this body can consider that would assist in at least streamlining this process from a time perspective? You know, whether it's to be able to get DPW in there to, you know, clear out the site and, you know, have the financial amount of money that's associated with that cost to be added to the property owner's property taxes. Is that something that we can potentially look at, or is the current process in place? Is it so state mandated that for all intents and purposes, it's just something that's incredibly static and doesn't have an ability to change?
Our notice violations for trash are 7 days. So after 7 days of notice, now bear in mind, notice goes by mail, goes to Syracuse first, but generally notice is 7 days in between mail date and when they're entitled to go move for a work order from DPW. Probably there's about a week of a delay. It's not an immense delay. But what is
Sure.
subject to a work order, generally the stuff that is at your curb.
Mhm.
So more difficult to work order porches and backyards and fenced areas.
Mhm.
Those would require a court order. I don't know if there's really much to be done on it from a council side, because whether or not something is garbage is an issue of fact that, you know, somebody can dispute. Now, has the city in the past work order to kill the owner without a court order under, you know, yes. I could think of a deceased, somebody had passed away in the property. And there was nobody from the estate that was going to be able to do it. And there was nobody to bring the case against. And ultimately, we're not allowed to make gifts of taxpayer funds. So by performing free work, for example, every work order is $355 for garbage. But in this case, we did allow the cleanup of that property. That property was 10 Jarvis.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anyone else have any other input that they'd like to offer?
Yeah, it's probably gonna go.
Councilman Burns?
Well, after the storm, the cleanup was so great, right? And we put everything aside. We said, there's no rules. We're just picking it up. We're just cleaning it up. And it was fabulous. And that's what happened. And a lot of times I wish that that's what we would just do. Just, we say, well, we're going to take them to court. Why don't we just clean it up and let them take us to court? What is the cost difference in the court? I mean, when are we going to lose if we show all the photographs of the garbage? What is the judge going to rule against us? I mean, why don't we just do something instead of saying, like up on Indiana, the property I've been talking about for 2 years now, it happens to be being cleaned up, but it got cleaned up. It's halfway cleaned up now, and the dumpster's still there. I just went by it today and spoke to the lady that's there now, but they finally were able to get rid of the nut that lived there. But that was the only way that they could get it cleaned, that they were going to clean it up. But had we just taken the garbage somewhere and then have him take us to court, say, okay, we have it stored for you. You were breaking the law. This was the law. You were breaking it. We gave you all the citations. And, your stuff is in storage. Thank you very much. And now the neighborhood doesn't have to look at it for 2 years. And I'm talking about a dump. Anyway, that's the way I feel.
I don't know the extent to which that can be done, but Councilman Burns, I couldn't echo that sentiment anymore. I can't even begin to tell you the amount of garbage I picked up myself and the lawns that I've mowed myself. I literally was driving my lawnmower there because that was quicker than waiting through a bureaucratic process. I mean, it's mind blowing. It is, and that's. Any actor that's in City Hall, that's not their fault. It's broadly, it's kind of just it's the dynamic of the environment that we're being provided with.
Right. And then the answer is always the answer to that. And I'm also on South Washington Street, I forget the number, but I had our code enforcement called them, spoke to them in person. They went over. And it's cleaned up. They made it happen, and so in some cases it does work.
Yeah, I even remember a few years back. I used to, on Tuesday afternoons, I would after late afternoon when I would get out of work, I would drive down to Kovar and I would buy 10 to 15 garbage stickers before we got rid of those. And I would just drive around areas of the district and I would just slap them on a big item so that they would get picked up the next day. So yeah, it's an issue. It's an issue.
Yeah, when I first came, they typically did not. They did far fewer work orders just about 6 years ago. And we brought everybody to court. I
Yeah.
think we make as much use of the work orders as we can, provided that we're
Absolutely.
not violating somebody's constitutional rights to their property and engaging in trespass. I think
Sure.
that that's really the issue. And I will echo what Councilman Byrne says, 10 Jarvis is probably not the only example where we have had situations where we've said, okay, we'll ask forgiveness later. But it's very sparing, and there are reasons for that have to do with, getting into somebody's property where we're not permitted to be.
I'm going to, if nobody had anything else, I wanted to just substantively pivot here for a moment. I'm hearing from a lot of residents, 3 issues that are kind of all tacked on together. Number 1, jaywalking. Number 2, people riding bicycles on the sidewalk. And number 3, a lot of, particularly as the weather gets warmer, potential automobile and road issues with people playing basketball in the middle of the road or things like that. I just wanted to make sure we're kind of having an all-encompassing conversation. Does anybody have any experience with that? Has anybody ever received constituent control or resident? I apologize, please.
Yeah, if I could just share some things. I
Please.
completely, can you hear me okay?
Please.
I totally agree with what you just said. I hear of the same things. Jaywalking. It's appears to be, was it always like that? Was I just not paying attention to it? I don't know, but I mean, I could just give one example, Leroy Street. And how many times people had said, we almost ran into people just not crossing at where they're supposed to. At night, it's difficult to see. Anyway, that is definitely a big issue that comes up. Bicycles on the sidewalks, absolutely. More and more, there's those electric bikes or bicycles. What are they? I don't even know how. And they have some sort of a motor, right? So
Electric bikes,
I'm
yeah.
getting calls about those not all the time, but a lot. And actually, just recently, a couple calls from Grand Boulevard, because he has wider sidewalks, and I think I don't want to. I'm guessing some are younger folks, kids, but they're taking advantage of that wider sidewalk. And I had a gentleman call and say that his wife was almost practically knocked down. So that too. But regarding the dog thing, it's interesting. I'm hearing, I don't know about you guys, but I hear more about feral cats than I hear about dogs. And I don't really have any answers for that. And I don't know what to tell folks. So, but yeah, I think, we should be addressing all these issues. And those are the top 3 that I hear about for the most part.
Yeah.
Besides
Cats.
garbage.
We have a
Councilman
cat
Burns?
problem. We have a cat problem over in the south side. Matter of fact, I had neighbors, we were just casually talking here, but I got called down. These neighbors wanted to talk about it. And there was a lady that was feeding them. And she was putting the food under the cars, and then she would feed them all the way down Pennsylvania Avenue in the bushes, all the way to Weiss and back when she went to Weiss, and they were all up in arms. And I didn't really know what to do about it. I mean, I think I called our clerk here and asked him what to do. Remember that one? Anyway, so I haven't
Yeah.
heard from them in a year, but anyway, it's a problem.
Yes, it is. Yes.
I wonder if, so this is something that I know a little bit about, but not that much. I know that we are supposed to be adhering to the Complete Streets program, or it's like it should be clear marking for either a bike lane or a sharrow or something like that. But I don't think that all of the street, and I don't know which ones are obligated to be marked in a certain way. I'm not sure. But as someone who is an avid biker, I bike in the street, not on the sidewalk, but I wonder if that like improving or changing the markings for the bikes, because I think, there's some, like near my house, there's an area with a demarcated bike lane. And what I'm thinking is, if there's a specific bike lane and that is more appealing to use than the sidewalk, I think people will naturally gravitate toward that. I don't know why people bike in the sidewalk. Maybe they think it's safer, even though it's not. But what do y'all think about that? Is that worth looking into? And again, I'm just bringing this up as someone who doesn't really know that much about it, but is that worth looking into or pursuing as a possible solution for the bikes on the sidewalk?
You mean actually have like bicycle lanes? I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
So
I know
Yeah,
some streets have them, you're right,
Councilwoman-
but
yeah,
Councilwoman Friedman, if I may for a moment, my
Mhm.
deepest apologies. Mr. Clerk, if you can hear me, could you please provide Councilwoman Friedman with a different microphone? I don't know if Sharon or Councilwoman Riley can back me up on this, but it's not her fault, but her microphone is crackling in a way.
Is this one
that-
working?
Yeah, Councilwoman Burns, yours and Councilwoman Resinetti's microphone, I'm hearing you both absolutely fine.
thank you.
But Councilwoman Friedman, yeah, it's sounding choppy, not because of you, but because of the microphone.
Yeah.
I apologize. Please continue. Go ahead.
So I'll summarize what I said was that, and let me preface this by saying I'm bringing this up as someone who, as like an idea that might be worth looking into, something that I don't necessarily know so much about, but I am wondering if part of the bicycle issue can be ameliorated if we improve or change the bike demarcations on the road, like having a bike sharrow or a bike icon, like a bike lane in the shoulder of the road or something like that. I don't know why people ride their bikes on the sidewalk. Maybe they think it's safer, even though it's not. But I think, as someone who is a biker, if there's a specific area that's noted for bikes, I'm definitely more likely to use that. I'm thrilled to find a bike lane. And my suspicion is that if there's a specifically maintained and designated bike lane, that might ameliorate the situation of people biking on the sidewalk. That's just my thought. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'll add on to that, and maybe I'll pass the baton on to Councilwoman Resinetti after I'm done here. But Councilwoman Resinetti and myself, we actually faced a similar issue, went to on a road that acts as a boundary for both of our respective districts. I'm speaking about Grand Boulevard specifically. And there was a discussion a little while back about adding a bike lane to bike lanes, forgive me, on both sides of the road on Grand Boulevard. And I don't know what Councilwoman Resinetti's experiences were. We obviously, we talked and communicated and worked together quite a bit at the time. This was a little over a year ago, but from my recollection, and when I say overwhelming, I mean probably, I can think of only one person that thought a bike lane on the street was an idea that they positively liked. The overwhelming responses that I received for residents were bike lane, Main Street, great. Floral, great. Clinton Street, great. Prospect, great. Main thoroughfares. The moment you start getting in the neighborhoods, there's a consideration of aesthetic and things of that nature. Overwhelming majority of homeowners and residents that I've spoken to that live on non-main thoroughfare roads do not like that idea. It's an interesting question to wonder, if there is a bike lane there, does that draw more people off of the sidewalk? That might very well be the case, but I've actually had 2 or 3 over the 6.5 years I've been on council, where on different roads this was brought up, and every single one of them was not a major thoroughfare. And overwhelmingly, most residents, I've never heard a positive idea for that. Councilwoman Resinetti or anyone else, I don't know if you want to add to that, but that's been my shared experience.
Yeah, no, I thank you for reminding us of that. You're right. I recall that, and most folks did not want a bike lane on that road. And interesting too, the question, would bikers then be more likely to use it and not be on the sidewalks? I don't know. But when you're thinking particularly of that street, Grand Boulevard, it is where anybody on a bike could easily be on the street, where, other streets are kind of tight. You might be a little worried or whatever. And yet it's not being used that way. They're still on the sidewalks. You've got to wonder if it would really change anything. But Councilman Scaringi is right about the feedback that we received from residents in that area.
I can speak anecdotally from a prosecution stance on this. So the Office of Corporation,
Sharon, please.
the Office of Corporation Counsel prosecutes the riding the bicycle on the sidewalk violations. The situation you're talking about, Councilman Resinetti, with motorized vehicles, that's governed by something else, and those are absolutely prohibited. I forget which section of the code it is, but it's the equivalent of riding your car on the sidewalk. So with regards to bicycle violations, I've heard one person in my time in the 6 years prosecuting them that said, I was on the street, right? And then I moved over because of a safety issue, because I think they were actually by Clinton Street. And there was not an ability for them to ride safely in the street, and we dismissed that ticket. So, just anecdotally speaking, to the extent people have raised that as a defense, it's been one time in 6 years.
Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe it's worth thinking about would maybe on those streets where there's a lot of biking going on, like, again, I keep going back to Grand Boulevard, maybe it's worth putting up signs or reminding folks, I don't know, maybe not, but something to remind folks that you need to not be on the sidewalk with your bicycles. Before we maybe consider revisiting the whole bicycle lane issue, if that's even, something somewhere we want to go down the road. But anyway, I'm just trying to think of ideas to help folks remember that, because I think sometimes we forget. People just get on their bike and they forget, especially like they have younger kids, whatever. And so how do we remind them that? Kind of like, you go to a park and you see signs about your dog, or, certainly that reminds me of what the rules are. So I don't know, just something to think about.
Anybody else want to offer anything on that? Councilwoman Friedman, please.
I wasn't raising my hand.
Oh, my apologies. Sorry about that. Anything else on that area? Okay, great.
I can't, well, I'll just say, like, I'll
Please.
take it on as an action item for myself to learn more about the Complete Streets program, and then I can report back, because I don't know so much about it, but I think that also might offer a helpful framework to tackling that issue.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
This is Councilwoman Riley. Good evening, everyone.
Please.
How are you?
Please, Councilwoman, go ahead.
Yes, as you were aware, I was unable to attend the meeting because I have a conflict, but I snuck out of my other meeting to join. Did I miss the agenda? Because I don't see that I received an agenda for tonight.
As it relates to discussion items?
Yes.
Yeah, I had started discussing that when we opened the meeting. It was in an email sent to everybody on April 10th as it related to what were the substantive areas we were going to talk about for meetings 1, 2, and 3. So this evening, yep, this evening, so the two categories this evening were quality of life issues and code crossing procedures.
Okay. And based upon that agenda, are we then adding to the list the sub-bullets for those two topics? What can you just update me on where we are? Again, I apologize for not being able to attend officially, but now that I am here, I hear various comments from the other council members. at this point, we're just listing what we've received and then categorizing them under those 2 priority bullets for today?
Correct, and that could obviously also be ongoing, but I think the point here is to, and which is a great reason why we were very lucky that Sharon from the Port Council perspective was able to join us, and talking about number one, what are the issues that we've experienced? What are kind of the mainstay issues that we're observing from our respective seats itself? And number three, most importantly, what are the bullet points that are actionable that we can potentially move something forward on?
Okay, so we are not develop measurable goals. We're just at this point having a discussion. So that helps me.
Sure. I mean, there can be a discussion on substance and measurement, but absolutely.
Okay, that helps clarify where we are. And then
Sure.
I'll contribute productively. I just did, we've had, again, thank you for that update.
Of course, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, that being said, we still have some time left. Want to make sure we're respecting everyone's time. Maybe we can take a slight substantive shift. So I know in our local city code, and ordinance, and Sharon, please feel free to back me up on this. I'm fairly certain as it relates to chickens, we have a maximum of 4 that correct, right? That can be on a property at a particular point in time. So I'd like to parallel that with dogs. And so I think there's an interesting caveat here to the extent that, number one, I'm just going to come right out and say it. I think if feasible, I think this body needs to consider something similar like that with chickens to dogs. And I'm talking very specifically about a number. I don't know what that number is. At the expense of being proactive, I think we also need to be mindful that in particular, as it relates to dogs, I think there's a small business element that I think we need to be mindful of as well, which we want, groomers and things like that. So there would, need to be exemptions for those legitimate businesses, because we obviously want to make sure that we're supporting them and we're not hindering what they do. And I don't know if any of my colleagues have experienced this, but I think Councilman Burns kind of mentioned this a little earlier. I know the exact property over on Clinton, right by the senior center that he's speaking to at the intersection by Jarvis. And there are some properties where you could just walk by and it might be fenced in, it might not be, and there can be 6, 8. I've seen at times even double-digit numbers, and I know that is not a groomer. And I think this also constitutes a broader discussion regarding dog registration, which obviously I know is administered by the city clerk's office, and I know a lot of that comes down to the state as well, right? They put certain initiatives over others. Like, for example, if your dog is spayed or neutered, the registration is at a lower cost. If your dog is not, for example, there's things like that. But I don't know if any of my colleagues have experienced anything along those lines, have anything they want to share. And Sharon, I don't know if you would like to obviously weigh in on that as well. I know Councilman Burns. Go ahead, Sharon.
Yeah, I can say it's very easy to make a distinction between commercial businesses or commercial properties and residential properties.
Right.
And there was a time where there was some discussion of like an animal control commission and I could probably pull that. I believe it was from 2016.
Yeah. I remember that actually, because that was my first year on council. Does anybody of my colleagues, again, with respect to proper exemptions, whether it be a small business, whether it be a groomer or a dog, anything. Does anyone like the idea of potentially putting a cap on something like that at a residential property? Does anyone have any thoughts? Anything they'd like to share, support, like the idea, don't like the idea? Don't even have to necessarily give a number right now, but just to kind of gauge the temperature of the room.
I don't mind that idea. A bit, well, something that came to mind that might be a little bit of a tricky situation is someone who is breeding their dog and has puppies. And I'm trying not to let my personal feelings about dog breeding get in the way of, like, you know, my job as a legislator, but I just wanted to flag that as a potential maybe tricky exception, because a breeder might not be a business, you know, they might be doing it in a residential, you know, in their house, in their backyard or something like that, but then might have 10 puppies.
No, I think that's a great point, right? I mean, it is something that we would have to consider from the exemption standpoint, albeit how tricky it might be. But that's a very fair point. Anyone else?
Does anybody know offhand what the code is on annoying dogs right now? You know, a one barking dog. Is there a rule that person has to control that barking dog at 3 o'clock in the morning? So is there such a rule?
Yes.
Councilman Burns, I was actually, you stole my thunder there. I was going to bring that up in about 2 or 3 minutes, but I'm more than happy to bring that on the table now. So Sharon, please.
Well, I'm just saying, if there's, then, you know, 5 dogs are barking, obviously, you know, okay, you can only have one barking. I mean, you know, I don't know, what is the rule?
Yeah.
The rule doesn't relate to a number. It relates to essentially kind of failure to control or a noise violation. In the dog context, Brian has actually handled these with various trials that we've had. You actually have to have recordings of the dog barking. There are times dogs are permitted to bark. They can't bark for longer than a period of time. There's a point at which it becomes a nuisance versus ordinary. So generally a dog barking for a minute, right, is not sufficient. A dog barking for 10 minutes may be sufficient if it's repeated conduct and not isolated to a number of instances. The evidence on it is quite heavy load, but we've done it usually with neighbor recordings that span over the course of time. But those issues are reported to TJ Schaefer. They are covered by the code.
Thank you. And also maybe there's a question of, are we keeping the dogs in the front yard or the backyard? On Clinton Street there, that problem, they scared the hell out of me. So I'm sure there's people that will have to walk across the street that don't want to walk past those dogs.
Yeah.
So if there was a backyard, would we even know they existed? You know, so, you know, there's that.
We've prosecuted both before.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and this is a really good tie-in actually to another quality of life issue, which is when a residence throws a party into late hours with very loud music or something along those lines. Sharon, you might be able to assist me in jogging my memory here, because I know this is an issue that we've dealt with over the years, and we've had discussions about with good levels of success in cases. If memory serves me correctly, a number of years back, as it relates to dogs or parties at properties with loud music, like you were saying, with the element of time, how long is the dog barking? I know we also have something in our local ordinance with respect to the number of decibels that a noise goes over. And with respect to documentation, so for example, person who lives at 123 Main Street calls the BPD, an officer shows up and they actually observe it. They witness it live, but they actually have no way to record the number of decibels that a that a dog or a loud party is making. And I'm fairly certain, if memory serves me correctly, the number of decibels is 60, I believe that's in the code. And just to give everyone just some kind of anecdotal reference, approximately 60 decibels of noise is standing within 1 to 3 feet of a loud vacuum cleaner. Just to kind of give you some references to what that volume is. I actually researched that and looked that up. And there was a discussion at the time about, does city council need to look at potentially investing in tools that would give officers or fire or code enforcement actual sound decibel readers? There are free apps that you can download on your iPhone, but I don't think that holds muster in a courtroom as it relates to something that's potentially prosecutorial. So is that something that is amendable? Is that something that maybe we should think about looking at? And not just Sharon, but also my colleagues, if you have any thoughts on it.
I can speak really briefly on it. And if you want follow up on it, Brian is actually best positioned to give it to you. So we did invest in that infrastructure, those tools before my time, maybe 10 years ago. And they're very specific devices, and we do have them. They require pretty intense training and an annual certification, and then they have to be replaced something like every 2 months. There's a part that needs to replace them. So and we don't have the people or the funding. The last time that I looked at this, and I can't remember, it may have been having to do with Bates Troy. But in any event, where we don't use them. There's some logistical issue with us not being able to use the devices that we have. So I'm happy to have Brian kind of give you his much more technical explanation of what that is. Because when I hear stuff like that, my brain starts to actually shut off because I don't understand why we have something that doesn't work. But I can have Brian get back to you on that. And I know that we can replace it, but we have had trouble finding what that decibel level is. It's much easier to establish disorderly conduct, for example, in the case of a party, than it is to get somebody on a noise violation.
Right. Anyone else? Thank you, Sharon. Mr. Clerk, could you please note for the record if we could have Court Counsel come down maybe to our MPA meeting 2? So as Sharon was suggesting, obviously if he's available, we'll check with his availability to see if he can come and speak more specifically to this as well.
Yes, I can do that.
Can I ask a question?
Thank you. Please, Councilman Burns.
Yeah, okay, so like tonight's meeting, so we did have a discussion, good discussions about different things, dogs and cats and bicycles and jaywalking. But so what do we do? Are we going to then make recommendations based on these discussions? I mean, they're good discussions, but I mean, yeah.
No, I agree, and this is kind of dipping back to when we started these discussions back in March and April, right? I mean, the ultimate goal here at the end of the day is that we want to come up with, forgive me, as best as possible, an all-encompassing list of the recommendations to make changes. I think we do need to discuss these things because it gets it out in the open. We find shared experiences, we find what we can potentially change, what we cannot. But on the same token, what I don't want is 7 meetings where we have great discussions, because then we're not actually getting something done.
Right.
Obviously, this being our first meeting, this is a good first step. But again, I think we want to be sensitive about time and proactivity to actually make a list. And this is, I think, and it's a good point that you bring up, because I think this is one of the major things that needs to be part of these discussions is, what can we change? What do we find consensus on 2 areas of change that we can actively change, and what those are? And then at the end, once we have that, working with the mayor to see what we can actually get passed into legislation and local ordinance.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
okay. I have one
Great.
anecdote. I have one
Please.
anecdote. It'll
Please.
take a minute, but you were talking about loud parties. This one time, the Burns family were having a big party, and it was at my parents' house, and the cops are called. So there's a knock at the door, and it's a Binghamton police officer, and it's my friend Jerry Grace, and we all grew up with Jerry, and his brother was also a cop, so we grew up with them. So Jerry says, he says to my dad, Mr. Burns, you got to keep it down. Okay, so we turn the stereo down, we keep everything, lower it. So then at around midnight, after the cops had changed their shift, we get another knock at the door. It's Jerry again. He's now off duty. He's now in his regular clothes, and he's got his guitar with him. Anyway,
That's funny.
that's it. Thanks.
Good story. Absolutely.
Burn parties. I don't know why we're not invited, all of us. What's going on?
Yeah. Did anyone have anything else that they wanted to add to it? Okay, great. Moving forward, looking at code processes and procedures. I think in a broad sense, and Sharon, I'll throw this question just as much to you as well as my colleagues. But I think there's a broad sense, and I think COVID has negatively impacted this due to the courts being closed for a long time and things of that nature. But I just wonder, is there anything that we can do with respect to increasing the timeliness and the efficiency in the broadest sense of code X is violated on date Y and remediation in the end occurs on date Z? And this time period might be 3 days, it might be 7 months. And is there anything that this body needs to consider to support our code enforcement department and our code enforcement officers, as well as, for what it's worth, court counsel, zoning, vacant property, because they're TJ in his role as dealing with animals and things of that nature. There's a lot of hands that touch this pot due to the diversity of different issues that may arise at any moment of the day. And is there anything that we need to consider, whether it's budgetary or not, to try to increase that time, increase that timeliness and increase that efficiency? And I'll throw this to any of my council colleagues first if they have anything that they want to add to that before Sharon speaks to it. Or anything at all? Okay, Sharon, please go ahead if you feel you have anything to share.
Sure. I think the city's explored different types of remedies before, some of which council's heard about, some of which haven't. There are various methods. I can't really speak to whether or not they would work here in the city, but I'm always happy to provide council with other examples. So for example, in Syracuse, they adopted a municipal code violations bureau, which essentially is an administrative proceeding, and you have to get approval from the state in order to transition you from a code violation where we're citing you to an administrative bureau. They have administrative law judges that work those cases. And essentially they use, similar to what Councilman Burns was talking about before, kind of a citation, fine, royalty taxes model after a hearing. But the administrative hearing process is faster than your court process. So that's something the city has talked about doing before, particularly when it comes to lower level violations like your vacant property, your junk vehicle. It's something that the city has not wished to pursue in the past for things related to endangerment of tenant welfare, for example, major chronic habitability issues, or even exterior violations like a roof demo, for example. Also, there are other cities that have passed laws that allow for kind of larger scale remediation in which you would need improvements to property. So you would do an RFP system. The city would contract with a contractor. And so your broken window, your bad siding, whatever it is, your exterior violations up to, usually it's a sum around $5,000, can be remediated by somebody, I should say, by a contractor that the city works with. And then that amount on notice still, right, could be added to taxes using the same kind of system. So those are just two kind of examples, but there are multiple ways to think about how do you address code violations differently than we do now, how successful they would be here, whether or not we have the budget for it. Is it sustainable, right? Is it gifts of taxpayer funds? You know, those are all kind of existing questions. With regards to the timeline of notice, you know, 7 days or 30 days, outside of things that need to be immediately correctable due to a life safety issue, which is 24 hours, you know, those confines are really set by New York state law. It's typically 30 days absent a life safety issue before you can go from the citation to filing. But there are different strategies. Other municipalities outside of New York State, because New York State has much more protective laws for landowners, use things like receivership or abandonment, but those are more difficult in New York State. Not to say it can't be done, but the evidentiary burden is much higher.
I mean, if there's an opportunity that we can explore some sort of I don't want to say freestanding agency, but some sort of entity that kind of rolls the entire process into itself. I mean, it would seem to me that to some extent that would probably increase timeliness in that vein. And you're right. I mean, there's issues obviously of budgeting, sustainability, and things like that that might come into play. I don't know how my colleagues feel, but maybe that's something we need to look into if there are current existing models in other municipalities in New York State that do that well. I don't know what anyone's thought is on that. Would anyone like to add anything to that? Okay, great. Well, I think we have some really, really good points here. I know a few of our, we're coming up in our 6:30 timeline is at 6:15 now. Is there anything substantive that anyone wanted to add that we haven't discussed yet? Okay, great.
What is the next meeting going to be? What is the next meeting going to be about?
In terms,
what is the subject matter?
I believe they were categories 2 and 4 of the 5 that I had sent out. Forgive me, I don't have my email in front of me, but I can look those up. And I also, with Monday's work session, I also don't mind taking out the time to, just take 2 or 3 minutes to kind of summarize what we discussed today.
Yeah.
And then actually we can all pull out our calendars and plan meeting number 2. I think that's a good idea. Sure. I agree. Anyone else? Well, that being said, I appreciate the discussion. I appreciate everyone joining in. Sharon, thank you so much for the time. I want to thank the clerk's office for preparing everything. And if there's no other business at this time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Excellent. Motion made by Councilwoman Rosinetti, seconded by Councilwoman Freeman. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Clark.
everyone.
Have a good night.
Enjoy your
Thank-
weekend.
Thank you, Councilman, for all the work.
Yes, thank you.
We'll all do it together.